A little over 2 weeks ago now, many of us gathered for Harold Gibson's memorial service. Often the bulletin for such services includes a quotation or two that has significance for the deceased or for the family on the bulletin. The bulletin for Harold's service was no exception. On the back cover, one found an Emerson poem called Success, and also a quote from contemporary poet Mary Oliver. As I began to prepare this sermon, I remembered that quotation. It is the very last line of a wonderful poem called When Death Comes. It begins with a powerful set of images and metaphors. Oliver compares death first to a hungry bear, and then to the measles, and then to an iceberg. And oddly, yet very powerfully, her final comparison is to a shopper. When death comes, she writes, and takes all the bright coins out of the purse to buy me and snaps the purse shut, I want to step through the door full of curiosity. The poem closes with an exceptionally reflective moment. When it's over, she writes, when it's over, I don't want to wonder if I have made of my life something particular and real. I don't want to find myself sighing and frightened or full of argument. I don't want to end up simply having visited this world. That was the Oliver quote on Harold's bulletin. I don't want to end up simply having visited this world. The poem is about many things, but ultimately it is all about legacy. It's all about what we leave behind when we die. Not just the material things, not just those things that can show up in your will, not just the stocks and bonds, the real estate and cash, not just your favorite fishing pole that you leave for your son or your great-grandmother's diamond engagement ring that you leave for a grandchild. No, your legacy is, as Joan Chittister writes, the quality of the lives of those we leave behind. Your legacy is the quality of the lives of those you leave behind. How have you touched those lives you have encountered along the way? How have you made them better? That's your legacy. I often find myself saying, as my father used to say, followed by some wise words he regularly offered up over the course of his lifetime. Those words are part of Dad's legacy. And I hope, son, I've left you a few of those words. I'm concerned about the environment in part because my grandmother, who cared about the natural world long before the first Earth Day, taught me to see the worth of birds and trees and bears and soil and water. That concern for the environment that I have is part of my grandmother's legacy. Each and every time we gather for a memorial service like the one we held for Harold, we consider how the individual in question has influenced our living how he or she will continue to make an impact in the years ahead. We consider the individual's legacy. That's exactly what's happening in this passage from Deuteronomy. The editors of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Scriptures, the editors were anonymous ancient scribes. We don't know who they were, but they had pulled together the various myths, legends, and stories of ancient Israel and then woven them together with the 613 laws of Judaism. And while there are many important characters in these stories, ranging from Abraham and Sarah to Jacob and his 12 sons, the central character in the saga, aside from God, is Moses. Moses the liberator, Moses the wilderness guide, Moses the lawgiver. And here in the very last chapter, in the very last verses of the 5 books of the Torah, the editors consider the legacy of Moses. Moses had led the people out of Egypt, through the wilderness, and right to the very borders of the Promised Land. And while he will not enter the Promised Land himself, they will. Indeed, his very last act is to climb to the top of Mount Pisgah and look over the territory that will soon be occupied by his followers. Moses, you need to understand, had no direct heirs. Yet in many ways, the whole nation of Israel is heir to his legacy. For after his passing, they have the law that he promulgated. And soon they have the land that he led them to. They have all that because of Moses. Great gifts indeed. A legacy like none other. Indeed, the authors write, never again did there arise in Israel a prophet like Moses. It is this story of the death of Moses that informs the last speech given by Martin Luther King Jr., who seems to have had a premonition about his own death. Speaking in Memphis on the night before he was assassinated, King expressed real hope about the future of the civil rights movement. "I would like to live a long life," he said, "but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go to the mountain, and I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we, as a people, will get to the promised land." And while King did have literal heirs, children of his own, few would argue that we are all heirs to his legacy, laws protecting the rights and freedoms of all our nation's citizens. We may not have gotten to the promised land quite yet, but we live in a better land because of King's legacy. Few, if any of us here, will have the impact of a Moses. Few, if any of us here, will leave a legacy as far-reaching as that of Dr. King. Yet the truth, sisters and brothers, is this: we all can leave behind a legacy. Whether you have direct heirs or not, whether you leave $1 million or a dime or nothing, whether you climb mountains or linger in the valleys, Each and every one of us can leave behind a legacy. Each and every one of us can make something of our lives and do more than merely visit this world. Speaking to the graduating class at Villanova, novelist and Pulitzer Prize winner Anna Quinlan encouraged her young listeners to do just that. She was very frank as she spoke to them. Get a life, she said. Find people you love and who love you, and remember that love is not leisure, it is work. Pick up the phone, send an email, write a letter, kiss your mom, hug your dad. Get a life where you are generous. Care so deeply about life's goodness that you want to spread it around. But preacher, some of you may be thinking, this isn't exactly a college graduation crowd. It's a little too late for me. That's good advice for those just starting out. But I've come a long way down the pike. I've done what I needed to do, and I should have thought about that earlier. Really, I've shot the wad called life, and really, well, I may have little to show for it, but so be it. But I say it's never too late. Never. Consider the case of Martha Kukarchin. At the relatively young age of 59, here that'd be considered a youngster. At the relatively young age of 59, Martha was struggling in the last months of her life with pancreatic cancer. She'd been a factory worker for the first part of her life, but then at the age of 40, she finally realized her goal of becoming a nurse. Despite living much longer than most pancreatic cancer patients, though, Martha had finally been admitted into a hospice program. Her days were literally numbered. Too late, one would think, to do much more than say some fond farewells and goodbyes. But Martha realized she still had one more gift that she could give. Martha realized she could still leave behind a legacy. For she could teach some nursing students about what it means to be a patient dying with cancer. So she called her alma mater, the Holyoke Community College Nursing School. I have cancer, she said, and I'm wondering if you'll need somebody to do a case study on a hospice patient. Martha promised to answer any and all questions students might ask. Nothing would be considered inappropriate. She would give them a patient's eye view of death. A rare opportunity indeed. For the next 2 weeks, 2 students came on a regular basis. She allowed them to prod and poke. She showed them where the tumor was. She had them place their hands on that part of her body and other parts to see the effects. She encouraged them to ask questions they might never be allowed to ask under normal circumstances. The 2 students who took on the challenge, Cindy Santiago and Michelle Elliott, were there as the disease progressed in those last 2 weeks. There, as the pain for Martha grew more intense, there, as it became harder and harder to manage that pain. Yet she insisted that they still come, and they were willing. It was hard for them to watch. Harder still when they got to the point where there really was nothing they could do but simply be there. Perhaps the most important thing anyone can do for someone who's dying. They got a true patient's perspective on the disease, on the pain, on the struggle. Martha died on a snowy December night late in 2012. But in just 2 short weeks, she had left behind a legacy marked by wisdom. And a legacy not just for Cindy and Michelle, the 2 students, but through them, for others as well, for they were given permission to share their experience and share their story. They were given permission to share the legacy. A legacy that no doubt will benefit untold numbers of patients in the years ahead. No, friends, it's never too late to consider your legacy. You may not be Moses or Martin or even Martha, but you do have an opportunity right now to consider your legacy, to ask what you will leave behind, not just for those who know and love you, but for the world. What will you do to leave it a better place? What will you do to ensure that when death comes, you will not simply have visited this world? Amen. Friends, we know that God indeed blesses the meal we're about to receive. We invite you to join us for pancakes. Be patient. They're being made especially for you, 1 pancake at a time. This business about legacy is tough stuff to think about. It's hard, it's challenging. It asks us to dig deep and look at things we may not want to be reminded of, like the simple fact we are mortal. But if I can't remind you of it, if I can't ask you to think of it, who can and who will? Go, and might it be said of you that you didn't simply visit the world, but that you made it a better place. Go in peace.